a pliers or a regular screwdriver for hose removal, a gasket scraper or putty knife, a drain pan or bucket, a non-hardening or silicone-type gasket sealer, antifreeze or radiator coolant, and a water pump and a gasket. Before starting the replacement, compare the new water pump with the old one on the engine, noting the hub height, hose connections, and bolt pattern to be sure that you have the right replacement. First, disconnect the negative battery cable to prevent shorting of any electrical connections when working under the hood. Next, locate the petcock fitting on the lower tank section of the radiator and drain the coolant from the radiator into the drain pan. Make sure the engine and cooling system are cool before removing the radiator cap or working on any part of the cooling system. Never remove the radiator cap when the engine is hot. With the radiator cap removed and the coolant draining, remove the fan and the fan shroud if so equipped. Remove any and all of the fan belts. Remove any components or brackets that are attached to the water pump, such as the air conditioning compressor, the alternator, the power steering pump, and any other component that obstructs the removal of the water pump. There is no need to remove the hoses attached to these components. Simply place them aside and out of the way. Disconnect the lower radiator hose from the water pump. Now disconnect any heater or bypass hoses that are connected to the water pump. Inspect all of the coolant hoses and replace any that are hard, brittle, or cracked. Remove the water pump attaching bolts and place them in the corresponding hole of the new pump as you remove them. This will make reassembly quicker and easier. Remove the old water pump. A light tap on the pump with a soft face hammer will help loosen the seal of the old gasket. If the pump does not come off easily with a light tap, do not try to pry it off. Double check first to make sure that all of the mounting bolts have been removed. Clean the old gasket and sealer off the mounting surface with a gasket scraper. You're now ready to install the replacement pump. Coat both sides of the gasket with a gasket sealer and install the gasket on the pump. Position the new water pump on the engine and start all the mounting bolts by hand. Put a small amount of gasket sealer on the threads of the bolts that protrude into the water jacket. Snug the mounting bolts with a wrench and give the shaft a quick spin to check for free operation. Now tighten all the mounting bolts. Do not over-tighten as this may cause damage to the pump or bolts. We suggest that you consult a service manual for proper bolt tightening specifications. Next, remount any brackets or components removed during the disassembly. Now reattach the fan and the fan shroud and tighten the mounting bolts. Reattach any hoses that were removed from the water pump. Tighten all the clamps securely. Inspect and replace the fan belts if necessary and reinstall the belts on the engine. Recheck all the hoses and belts for tightness. Close the radiator drain and refill the radiator with the correct mixture of coolant. Now start the engine with the radiator cap removed and add coolant as necessary. Double check all the hoses and connections for leaks and reinstall the radiator cap. If your vehicle is equipped with a coolant recovery system, add coolant as necessary to the reservoir.
Let's recap how to replace your water pump. First, disconnect the negative battery cable. After the engine is cool, drain the coolant. Remove any components that obstruct the removal of the water pump. Disconnect any hoses and belts attached to the pump. Loosen the mounting bolts and remove the water pump from the vehicle. Clean any old gasket from the mounting surface on the engine. Install the new gasket onto the new water pump. With a light dab of sealer on the mounting bolt threads, install the water pump onto the engine. Remount any components that were removed earlier. Reattach any belts and hoses to the new water pump. Refill the radiator with a 50-50 mixture of antifreeze and water. Finally, check all hoses and connections for leaks.
Most of today's vehicles with engine-driven fans are equipped with fan clutches. The average lifespan of a fan clutch is somewhere between 40 and 60,000 miles, although they have been known to fail in less. If your fan clutch shows visible signs of fluid leakage, wobbles when moved back and forth by the fan blade, or makes noise, it's definitely time for replacement. Replacing your fan clutch is easy and only requires a minimum of hand tools to complete the job. Usually, a couple of combination wrenches and possibly a socket set is all you will need. Any job is easier and safer if you first start the repair with a cool engine. Then begin by removing the original fan and fan clutch assembly from the water pump shaft. On some vehicles, it may be easier to access the fan if you first remove or reposition the fan shroud. Most likely you won't have to loosen any drive belts, as the fan drive belt will help hold the pulley in place on the water pump shaft. When removing the fan and fan clutch from the vehicle, be careful not to move the pulley position or you will have to loosen the belt to reposition it. With the fan and fan clutch removed from the vehicle, unbolt the fan from the fan clutch. Inspect the fan and fan blades. If any signs of stress, cracking, or missing blades are noticed, replace the fan at the same time. Reinstall the fan to the new fan clutch using the bolts supplied. To prevent future loosening of the bolts, we suggest placing a drop of Loctite thread locking adhesive on the bolts before installing them. If the bolts had lock washers, reinstall these at the same time and tighten the bolts to the correct specifications as detailed in the instructions. This is usually approximately 15 foot-pounds with a torque wrench. Reposition the fan and new clutch to the water pump. Start the mounting nuts or bolts by hand to prevent cross-threading. Again, place a drop of Loctite thread locking adhesive on the threads. Make sure to fully tighten the mounting bolts to the proper specification. Start and run the engine for approximately 5 minutes. Then, with the engine shut off, recheck all bolts for tightness and double-check the tension of the fan belts. Tighten any that appear loose, and you're finished.
Let's quickly review replacing a fan clutch. Be sure to start with a cool engine. First, remove the old fan and fan clutch from the water pump shaft. Unbolt the fan from the fan clutch. Inspect the fan for damage and replace as needed. With a light dab of Loctite on the mounting bolt threads, reinstall the fan to the new fan clutch. Install the new fan clutch and fan onto the water pump. Start and run the engine for approximately 5 minutes. Finally, shut the engine off and recheck all the bolts and belts.
The tools you will need for the installation include a regular and needle nose pliers, a pair of snips, a 1/4-inch drive socket set with extensions, a wrench set, an awl or punch and a hammer, and a wire crimper for best results while wiring. Begin by familiarizing yourself with the instructions included with the fan. We suggest placing the small parts in a box to prevent their loss. Then assemble the fan as detailed in the instructions. First, attach the motor to the mounting brackets using the nuts and bolts supplied. When all of the mounting bolts are in place and hand tight, tighten them with a socket wrench, but be careful not to over-tighten these bolts as damage to the mounting bracket may result. Align the groove in the fan with the roll pin of the motor shaft and place the fan blade on the motor flat side down. Next, secure the plastic fan to the motor using the shaft clip provided. Secure the clip onto the shaft by pressing downwards with a 7/16 socket and nut driver. Attach the control box to the mounting bracket with the plastic rivets supplied. Make sure the control box is mounted to allow access to the temperature adjusting screw. Press the rivets into the holes, and with a small punch and hammer, lightly tap the rivet center until it is flush with the rivet head. Insert the temperature probe through the mounting pad and button with the factory offset hole. You may need to enlarge the hole slightly with the screwdriver or punch to ease the installation of the probe. Next, position the 4 mounting pads